Good day, sir. My name is Cedric Monreal, and I will explain my part in our midterm project. As you can see, we are here in the main class. We have these two global variables named student list for storing the student and the subject list for student for the storing of the subjects. We have this buffered reader named reader. This buffered reader will read the input of the user. We have these variables for storing the input of the user. We use do while loop so that the program will loop again unless the program or the loop reaches breakpoint, which is in our program, which is the menu driven. If you input H, the program will stop and the program will print exit. And this is the code for that. In my part, I will explain these lines of codes and also these method. But first, I will explain these lines of code. If you run the program, just wait. At first, if you run the program will asking for your input. This code is printed, and this is the output. A for create new student, B for create new subject. C is to enlist subject to student, D is for removing subject from a student, E for display details of a student, and F for display all the details of all student, G for displaying all student details enlisted in a selected subject. And as I said earlier, H is for the exit. The program will asking for input of the user. I will input the A. The program will asking for student ID, which is I will input 1, 2, 3. The name is said, first name is said, and the last name is Monreal. The course is BSIT. After you enter in your keyboard, the program will print the successfully added in the storage. And second, we will create a new subject. After you input the B, the program will asking for the subject ID, and I will input 108. Subject name is CCS. Units is 3. After that, you successfully added a new subject, and in the C, I will enlist the subject to a student. I will input C. Program will asking to who student you will be input a subject, and as we created earlier, we input 1, 2, 3 the ID of the student. We input 1, 2, 3 in this asking. After that, we input the ID of the subject that we want to enlist to a student. After that, the program will print successfully enlisted in CCS. The 108 subject ID is the CCS subject name. CCS is the subject name. Sorry. After that, I will explain. And we use method for displaying, which is the display method. If the user input E, program will asking for display student details. As you can see, I will input 1, 2, 3. As we created earlier, the student ID is 1, 2, 3. And after that, the program will display the student details. This is the student details: name, last name, per course, and if the student will enroll in the subject, this is the number of enrolled subject in this student. Subject name is 108, CCS, and 3. And for the code, and this is the method for displaying this output. If you call this method, the program will print student details, and this underscore will be repeated 20 times, and this will print the student ID, first name, last name, and course. And if a student having a subject in his record, the program, for example, this is the subject, and if the student having a subject in his record, the program will print the subject ID, subject name, subject units. And even the student having multiple subject, the program will print all the subjects enrolled in the enlisted in this subject, in this student. We use this for loop to enlist all the subject, to print all the subject in the student. And after that, if the student does not enroll in any subject, the program will print the student not enrolled in any subject. And after that, the program will asking for another input. Again, my name is Edix Monreal. Thank you.
Good day, sir. I am Daphne Deres. This is the code that assigned for me, but I will go first discuss the student information system process. So we have operation to perform. Input a letter below. So I choose A for creating a new student record. Student ID, for example, 2000. First name, Daphne. Course BSIT. We are now successfully added to a new student. Next, we choose B. We have a twist here. It is possible that we have a duplicate subject record. So let us see. Enter subject ID, for example 2. Enter subject name PE. Enter units 3. So we are successfully added to a new subject. So let us try if it's possible to have a duplicate. We enter again this input here, B. Enter subject ID 2. As you can see here, subject ID is already existed. So let us go here to the program code. Input A, it's either capital or not. So system output print, create new student record. This underscore is repeated 26 times. And enter student ID that can be read by student ID. So enter first name that can be read that first name. Student output enter last name that can be read that last name. Student print enter course that can be read by the course. So we have a student list here that is a compliance or a storage of student ID, first name, last name, and the course. And system output print will print you are successfully added to a new student. And in B, input B, it's either B, capital B or not. So we create a new subject record underscore again that repeated 26 times. Enter subject ID that can be read by subject ID integer. This will check if subject ID is already exists. It's a get subject equals null. So system output print enter subject name that can be read by subject name. System output print enter units that can be read by the units. As you can see here, we have a student list that compliance or storage of student ID, first name, last name, course. We have subject list for a compliance or storage of subject ID, subject name, units that print by you are successfully added to new subject. So else system output print subject is subject ID is already existed if we going to input the same new subject record. Thank you.
Good day, sir. I'm Maverick Joven del Rosario. Here in C, you will enlist a subject to a student. If the user inputs C, the program will print enlist subject to a student, and it will ask the user to enter student ID. If the user puts student ID, the program will read it. Next is the program will ask the user to enter subject ID. Same with enter student ID. If you put subject ID, the program will read it, and you have successfully enlist subject to a student. Next here, if you have mistake or mistype a subject ID or student ID, the program will print subject ID doesn't exist and student ID doesn't exist. And if you put a non-existing ID, or there is no student record or subject record, the program will print there are no existing subjects in the record and there are no existing students in the record. Here's the example. In C, you will enlist subject to a student. Here, you will type the student ID and subject ID, and here it will show you that you have successfully enlisted the student in a subject. And here's the example. If you put a wrong ID, it will show student ID doesn't exist. And same with subject ID. Subject ID doesn't exist. That is all, sir. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, sir. My name is Midterm, and this is my part of my midterm presentation project. So my part is to remove a subject from a student. So we will input the letter D. Consider there are no existing students in the record. So we will create a new student record, which is we will type the letter A. Then it will input the student ID. For example, I will put the 18220. Next, it will put your first name. So I will input my first name, which is. Next is the last name, which is I will put my last name, which is Lim. It will successfully added a new student. So we will add a new subject record. So we will put the letter D in the subject. So we input the ID. So we input the 108. Next is the units, which is the units of that is number 2. So successfully added new subject in the. So successfully added new subject. So we will enlist a subject to a student. So we will type the letter C. So we will put the student ID again, which is 18220. The subject ID is 108. Oh, it was successfully enlisted in the CCS. Now we will remove a subject from a student. So we will input the letter D. It shows that student was successfully removed in the CCS. So we will remove again. It will shows that the student was not enrolled in the CCS. Next for the codes, if I input the letter D in the program, we'll ask if there's an existing students in the student list. If there's a student list in the program, we'll ask if there are an existing subject in this record. After that, if there's existing subject in the record, the program will print a remove from a student, and from a student enters the student ID. And asking for a student ID is existing in the list, the program will ask for the enter subject ID.
And if the subject ID is existing in the list, will be removed from a student using this method. If the subject does not exist in the program, will print the subject ID does not exist. If there's a student ID does not exist, it will print the student ID does not exist. If there are no existing subjects in the record, it will print there are no existing subjects in the record. If there are no existing students in the record, it will print that there are no existing students in the record. That's it. That's my part in our presentation.
Hey sir, I'm Johnny Dagoy and I'm here to explain my part in our midterm project, which is E and F function. As you can see, sir, I already created 2 students and 1 subject. I already enrolled a subject, 2 students, and for now I will display the details of a student, which is A. Enter the student ID. After the program asking for the student ID, the program will print the details of the student, including the subject that is enrolled to him. And after that, I will explain the F function, which is displaying all the details of all students. After I input the F function, the program will show all the student details. For the code, sir, if the user input E, the program will ask if there are an existing student in the list. After that, the program will print the student details and asking for student ID. If the student ID is existing, the program will display the details of the student using display method. And if the student ID is not existing, the program will print that student doesn't exist. And if there's no existing student in the list, the program will print are no existing student in the record. And if the user input F, the program will ask if there are existing student in the record. And if there's student in the record, we use for loop to read all the student existing and print them using display method. And after that, the program will print the number of existing students in the record. And if there are no existing student, the program will print and there are no existing student in the record. And that's my part, sir. I'm Johnny Dagoy. Thank you.
Good day, sir. My name is John Paulo Amantigue, and this is my part for our midterm project presentation. And this is the class fields, and this is the default constructor, parameterized constructor that accepts 3 parameterized, that is subject ID, integer type, string, wait lang, and subject name, string type, and units, integer type. Use this dot subject ID to access the class fields, and this is our getters. Public int get subject ID to get subject ID, and return this dot subject ID to return the subject ID. We use this return for our program. And public string gets subject name to get subject name, return subject name, and public int get unit to get units, return this dot to return units, and this private list student stands for our storage of our system, and this is our getters. This is our parameters constructor, and this is our default constructor. This is our class field. That's all. Thank you.
Hello, Sir Janus. My name was Corpus Brian Rasis A, hereby to do my report. So my part here was to explain the enlist student and remove student, which is the class method from the subject class, and the get student and get subject, which is a static class method from the main class. So first I'll explain the enlist student, which has the parameter of student, which first works for the for loop, which has this kind of method. Actually explains the same as this one, if the which has the initialization of int I is equals to 0 and has the condition if the I is less than to the student list size, then the I will increment. Same from the if, which has the same explanation as this one, I mean the alternate, if say so, that if given student is equal to one of the student on the given student list, then the program will print out that the student is already enrolled in the subject. Otherwise, the student will be added on the given student list, and the subject, the given subject will be added to the student data as well. To the given student data as well, and also print out that the student has been successfully enlisted into the given subject. The next one was to remove student, which also has the parameter student, which also has the same construction of for loop within the first one. Same with the if the given student is equal to the one of the student of the given student list, then the student here will be removed on the given student list, and also the given subject will also remove from the given student data as well, and also print out that the student has been successfully removed to the given subject and return. Otherwise, the system will print out that the student is not enrolled to the given subject. So the next one was the static class method, which is the first one was the get student, which has the return of the student a parameter of ID, which works as well to the first one that has the initialization of int I is equals to 0, and if the given I is less than to the student list size, then the I will also increment. And also if the ID, as we see here, if the given ID was equal to one of the ID of the student on the given student list, then it will return the student. Otherwise, it will return to null. Same as the subject, but this time has the subject return as a return. Also same as the parameter, which is ID. Also start for the for loop, same from the other one. And also if the given ID is equal to the given ID of one of the subject on the subject list, then it will return the given subject, the specific subject. Otherwise, it will return to null as well. So that's it for my report, and thank you.
Hello, I'm Crisan P. Dontriano, and I'm going to explain this method to show enrolled students. So in the first line of code, there's an student details enrolled in plus subject name that to uppercase open close parenthesis plus colon. So in the first line of code, this will be first print. So in this method, that to uppercase open close parenthesis, so the subject name will be or the first letter of the subject name will be big letter. Okay, if you input small letter in the first letter of the subject name, it will be print big letter only in the first letter, or the first letter of the subject name. So in the second line of code, there's the underscore that repeat open close parenthesis 29. Okay, so this underscore, it will be repeat 29 times. Okay, the under, like this highlight. Okay, it will be repeat 29 times. So after that, there's a condition if student list that size open close parenthesis is greater than 0. So in this for loop, you can see inside the condition if in this for loop, it is an enhanced for loop, for loop that to iterate through list students collections. So for student, so it is a shortcut like that. So the for student colon student list. So inside the for loop, there's it will be, the first will be print is student ID. So the student ID will this student ID that get ID. So the ID of the student will be get. Second, first name, student that get first name. So the first name the student will be get. If you input my first name, like I'm Chrisan, so it will be print, or it will be print Chrisan. So the last name, second code, the line of code is last name plus student that get last name. So the last name of the student will be get, or also will be print. Okay, so like I said, it will be get, also a print, get student, get the ID of the student, and it will be print. So the course plus student that get course. So the course of the student that you input, it will be get and print. Okay, after that, there's an system that print in numbers of student enrolled in plus subject name. Example, if you assign the student, like if assign myself into the subject OP, or enlist my ID or me to that subject, it will be print like OP. OOP, under the OOP, there's an that my name. Okay, under the OOP. So subject name plus that student, that size open close parenthesis. So else if you have not input, like if you are not in list like that, so if you or -0, like there are no existing student enrolled in this subject, like that. Okay, I'm going to show to you. Okay, so after that, this method, like I said, is adapt. Okay, is wait a minute, is adapt on the in this main method, in this input equals G. So we use alphabets. So in the G letter, you can see the show enrolled students methods. So I'm going to show to you Okay, wait a minute. So first, so I'm gonna create. So I will input A, create new student record. So I'm gonna use my student ID in PNC, my first name, last name, and my course. So successfully added new student. So I'm gonna create a new subject. So I'm gonna input B. So enter the subject ID 1. Subject name will be OOP example. So I'm gonna invent units like it will be 3. So I need to enlist to this to show you the subject that list. Okay, under the subject like I explained earlier. So I enlist. So the student ID, my student ID is, okay, wait a minute, I'm gonna check my student ID. Okay, there's an error. The subject na ID, okay. Okay, successfully enlisted in OOP. So like I said, G. So it will, like I said earlier in this example, so display, okay, 1. Because I enlist the my name or my ID inside the subject name OOP, this will be print. So thank you for listening.
Good day, sir. I am here to present this line of code under student class. We put private in ID, private string, first name, last name, course, and the array list. And this is for the getters to return the get student ID, get first name, last name, course. And this is the default constructor and the parameterized constructor. And for the methods, we put add subject and remove subject. In subject method, we created an add subject method to add the subject. Within its parameter, we declare the subject so that when we call it a method that was placed in the parameter, it would be presented to the subject list. And for the remove subjects, for removing the subject in the list of the student, you create a method within the parameters place subject. To call, it will recommend that if it's fully within the loop, it will able to remove if there's a partner it recommends to the list subject, like in this part of code.